When we speak of ISB and its impact on students, the one word that stands out is transformation. We welcome bright young minds to the school, see them graduate with flying colors, and go on to accomplish some incredible things. Over the past 2 decades, he has worked at the intersection of finance, entrepreneurship, and impact, helping build and back businesses, tackling some of the most pressing challenges in emerging markets. His journey has taken him from global finance to the heart of India's startup and investment ecosystem. Always bullish on India's long-term growth story, he reinforced that conviction by pursuing the PGP at ISB and choosing to build and invest in ventures here. Early in his careers in India, he co-founded Aspada, one of the country's pioneering impact investment platforms, supporting ventures across sectors such as agriculture, healthcare, and financial inclusion. The experience shaped his belief that scalable businesses can also drive meaningful social and economic change. Today, he is focused on helping Indian manufacturers and exporters compete globally by simplifying the complexities of cross-border trade and logistics. Join me for an in-depth conversation with Thomas Hyland from the PGP Class of 2010. Tom, it's so wonderful to have you here, back at your campus, but also in SV4, which is your home when you were here on campus in 2009 when you came in.
That's right. And actually, you might recall, we were the first batch to live in this SV.
Correct. You were the original first inhabitants of the student village.
Yeah.
And I want to start off by asking, generally for a lot of us in India, we have friends and family in the US, and the term ABCD is very popular.
Yeah.
You know, the American-born confused desi. I don't know if it's a compliment or not, but you've taken that 2 letters ahead and you call yourself an ABCG.
Yep.
So tell us more about it.
Yep. Well, yeah. So, I came to India first 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Having grown up in New York, having not traveled extensively outside of the United States, but having been educated there as an undergrad. And after college, I went off to work at Goldman Sachs in San Francisco. And this was about 2000, 2001, where in the institutional investing world, the term BRICS had been coined, right?
Got it.
And at that time, I remember reading all this research about rising tigers and rising elephants, China and India, and what was going on in this part of the world, and thinking to myself, I'm just incredibly naive, right? I kind of was reading the macro story, but I didn't really know what it looked like, what it felt like. And I felt that I needed to actually go and see it and immerse myself in it, because it felt like this would be an important growth engine. At around the same time, I also became very interested in microfinance and broadly my foray into the impact space, where I'd be for concurrently for the next 20 years. And so after a few years at Goldman Sachs, I decided I would actually take some time and travel. I bought a one-way plane ticket to China.
Okay.
And embarked by myself for close to 2 years of independent travel.
So it's really quite an adventurous one.
It was adventurous, and it was also very, very low cost. I mean, I was staying in places for a couple dollars a night, trying to travel very cheaply. But I think when you do that, you actually see things, right? It actually forces you to immerse yourself. But after nearly a year of that, I remember I was in Thailand thinking about where to go next.
Okay.
And kind of thinking, where could I actually get the next cheapest flight? And that actually happened to be a Druk Air flight on its way to Bhutan, but it had a stop in Calcutta. So I said, okay, India's next. And I booked myself on that flight and landed in Calcutta in what was then the old airport.
Yeah.
And within about 30 seconds, I knew I was home.
Really?
Yeah. That this was something different. The energy, the color, the liveliness of it was just on another dimension from other parts of Asia, from anything else I had seen. And from there, I started my journey, which was close to 9 months riding trains across India. At the time also was meeting people in the microfinance industry and thought that was something I really wanted to work on, right? Because I had this desire to combine both a financial services background with social sector work, and microfinance seemed to be an obvious place to do it. After my travels, I went back to the US for about 2 years. And actually, I was working for a social sector organization called Sea Change.
Okay.
And Sea Change had raised capital from a number of very large foundations, Gates Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, and a group called the Omidyar Network.
Yeah.
And the Omidyar Network was a big microfinance and impact investor. And at the time, they were actually setting up a fund here at the ISB, which was the Song Fund. And it was going to be a very pioneering impact-focused fund. And it had an investment along from some other very large foundations. And I got to learn about that. And I was actually introduced to the school as a result. And I said, I hadn't gone to business school yet. I wanted to be back in India because I thought professionally this was a great place to be. And so why don't I just combine the two? And so I applied, was accepted, enrolled, and came here to campus sight unseen in 2009 to join the batch. And very much with the focus of working on that fund and continuing to work in the impact space as well.
So when you were on campus, you were, again, very much focused about wanting to continue in this professional journey that you had been part of prior. And so tell us, post ISB, how did you sort of, continue that focus? And you actually stayed back in India, right?
I did. I did.
Yeah.
So that fund, the Song Fund, made a total of 4 investments. It was a relatively small fund. And at the time, experimental, because impact in India was largely defined as microfinance.
Sure.
Song was set up expressly to invest beyond microfinance.
Yeah.
The idea for us was to invest into small businesses, into agricultural supply chains, into healthcare, and into education. And so following the Song Fund, we went and raised what was effectively a follow-on. It was called Aspada.
Yeah.
And we moved from Hyderabad down to Bangalore and built a team there. Aspada went on to make around 20 investments where we continued to widen that focus. But, we did a lot in agricultural supply chains and productivity enhancement for small farmers. We had chains of hospitals. And these would be primary and secondary care and district headquarters.
So it's tier 2, tier 3,
tier 2, tier 3. Yes, absolutely. And so, while some of the investments we made, they may be headquartered, the team may sit in one of the big cities. By and large, the operations were, out further in tier 2, tier 3, even rural India.
You would have gone to these places, met with the locals. What was it like from your point of view? And what was it like from people on ground to see an American coming and talking to them about, let's say, farming or, cold chains that you're helping or access to market and all of these things? I'm just curious about what the interaction was like.
Yeah, it was always very warm. And, often I was a source of amusement or wonder.
Yeah.
Obviously drank a lot of Nimbu Pani in the village. But that piece, was I think learning on both sides. And in this kind of work in impact investing, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
You have to get out if you want to understand, what the options someone is facing between a government hospital and what this private sector intervention might do.
Sure.
Right? In agriculture, you want to understand the market dynamics around the mandi. Right? You actually have to go with the farmer and go
early morning,
go into it, see what it's like when he's a price taker and what this company might be able to do if it actually buys directly. Right? So that piece of diligence is critical. And I contrast this with, a lot of the more tech-led investing in a place like Bangalore, where you meet very smart, ambitious entrepreneurs who are building, let's say, more tech-led, asset-light solutions. You end up meeting them in Koramangala and Indranagar and HSR.
Yeah.
But to actually go and see what's happening on the ground, it requires time and effort, but it's not something you can bypass. Right? It's critical to understanding how the business model works.
And I want to ask you, so one is on ground interaction that you had, but also in, let's say, in these coffee shops in, let's say, Indranagar, Koramangala that you were talking about. How was your experience as an expat in India? This is about 15 years ago when you started this journey professionally. How has it been in the start and how has it evolved? Because you've spent considerable amount of time in the country.
Yeah, so certainly entrepreneurship has taken hold, right? When I think about my batch 15 years ago, there was a handful of entrepreneurs that went on, and some of them done quite well and quite notable.
Yeah.
If now when I interact with students, everyone wants to either join a startup or build something themselves. And so that is really, really energizing. I think the quality of younger entrepreneurs actually coming into these more difficult nuts and bolts spaces,
Yeah.
right? So for a long time, when we think about agriculture or cold chain, generally they were older, very experienced teams that might have come out of a big, multinational operating here or a big business here. Now you see people in their 20s, right, who have a solution, who are actually trying to work on things in dairy, in telemedicine, in small business lending, places that were the domain of really deep sector expertise and often age.
Yeah.
And so I think the quality of entrepreneurs working across multiple spaces has greatly magnified. And people are taking on all kinds of different challenges. It's not just that young people are building, in AI. They may be using it, but they may be using it to tackle, a real off-world problem.
One of the things I want to ask you is about your decision to come to India for the MBA program. And so oftentimes, people from India, students look to the US and elsewhere for a program. But it's of course the choice of the institution is important, but it's also in our belief it's the economic migration. So they like somebody wants to go to the US, study in a top school, then they're like, I want to then stay on for work for a few more years. And eventually after that, they may be then happy with the quality of life and various other reasons, they may just stay back. But we don't find too many people doing the other way around, right? I mean, we have very few people like you who have come here to, India to an ISB. But economic migration is not the reason. But in your case, it's very different. You came here, you stay put, and as you've just told us, you came here with an intent to stay put, right? What was it like, and what is the message to someone, let's say, young American who's thinking, I love India, I'm fascinated, maybe I've been there once, but I don't know what it is like to be there for a longer duration. What would be your message?
So I made the choice, and I did not compromise on a world-class education, right? I mean, obviously India is ranked now 12 in the world, and whether it's 5 or 12 or 20, this school is on par with any institution you'll find in the United States. So there was no compromise there. As I sat back and looked at my BRICS reports, and then subsequently, I took the view that this is where the economic engine of the world is, right? And I think that's played out. This is the fastest growing major economy in the world, and I wanted to be a part of it. I also took the view that it wouldn't be necessarily an easy place just to show up, or just to get a job here. It's actually can be complicated, right? So I needed a way to anchor myself, and ISB actually checked all of those boxes, right? It allowed me to come in. It was foundational for me in that it helped me make friends. It helped me make networks. It helped me slowly understand India's operating system in a way that I don't think you can, even if you come here with a job, right? And say someone who works in IT in Bangalore or in Hyderabad, they don't have the grounding of having gone to school, with with 600 people, having sat in the classrooms, having learned some of the inside jokes, having understood the importance of festivals or birthdays or holidays and weddings, right? All these things that kind of come along with just being part of the scenery here. And so I thought you just had to be immersed in the environment. I continue to maintain that this is a fabulous place for international students to come. I wish more of them would. I think going forward, it's a focus of mine, and especially as India is in the news and growing, and this is a place where foreign capital wants to come. You're starting to see a lot of Indian brands go global. I think India to the world will become much more prevalent. For any student looking, where's the future, right? To go to a hockey analogy, right? Skate to where the puck is going, right? If you think that the engine of growth is here, then you need to be here, right? And I think you need to be here in a grounded fashion. ISB is actually viewed as the hub. It is the node by which business, economy, philanthropy all sit and transact, right? And a world-class education as well.
And I want to ask you about your time at ISB, the 51-week roller coaster, as students describe it. What was it like? What were some of the special moments?
It was intense. I think, a big part about starting a business school is time management.
Yeah.
Right? And just trying to figure out how you're going to get everything done at once. Because as you well know, there's no gradual curve. You come in and things start coming at you pretty quickly. On top of that, I was managing, being in an Indian classroom for the first time.
Sure.
And, the certain dynamics of understanding who's who, there are all kinds of things. I learned what a topper was.
Yeah.
I learned what time pass was. I learned what Arbit CP was. all these terms that kind of came along with it. But for me, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was incredibly colorful because, not only was I learning DMOP and accounting.
Yeah.
Right. I was taking in this cultural immersion.
Sure.
Where, seeing incredibly bright, competitive, so collaborative students and, sitting in the middle of these discussions. So for me, everything was new and fascinating and wonderful.
And I want to ask you in terms of your learning thing, there's a lot of faculty sessions that are there at the school. There's very interesting ones and visiting faculty model, as you know. What was it like? What appealed to you in some of the courses? What was your specialization and what were some of the choices that you made? And what were some of the choices you regret not having made?
So I tended to lean more towards courses around entrepreneurship. There was a microfinance course actually taught at the time.
Yeah.
I did a lot of almost, if not all of the economics courses. So I really leaned into those. Organizational behavior was a wonderful course. Government, business, and society.
Yeah.
Kind of an India by the numbers, which for me, even more so, I think was a very fascinating course. A lot of the negotiations. Obviously, that was a very, very popular course, right? So I leaned really hard into those. I didn't spend as much time, although I wish I actually had, on some of the marketing courses.
Okay.
And probably some of the more difficult operations management courses,
Sure.
which I could have probably done at the time and would have benefited from.
Yeah.
But, there's only so much you can do.
Sure.
And, the handling 4 courses at the time, right, in the core, and then thinking of going to 5 or even more in the electives was daunting enough. That I tried to get everything in as I could.
If you were to offer a piece of advice to, let's say, the students right now or the incoming students in a couple of months, what would be your sort of top friendly advice be on how to face campus?
I think the one thing I would advise is settle down, right? Everything's going to be okay in the end, right? As you know, people arrive with tremendous anxiety about placements, for sure, right? And they're already thinking about placements in term 1.
Yeah.
And I understand, right? Because, it's not an inexpensive proposition to go to any graduate school. And they think about where they want to go. But if you ask almost any alum at the end, they'll tell you they actually regret not having taken more courses, right? Or done that additional entrepreneurship project, right? Or taken on something that they don't have time for now in their very busy lives, right? So I think broadly and laterally, right? Beyond, once you figure out time management, right? And once you figure out how to address your core work, there is time for other kinds of elective opportunities.
Both within the classroom and beyond the classroom.
And beyond the classroom, right? Even sports, even doing things in an organized fashion, trying something new.
Yeah, of
right?
course.
If you've never played hockey, maybe you've never played badminton or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You can learn to swim laps. I mean, there's a lot you can actually take on here. And I think having a very diverse experience is also terrific for mental health.
Yeah.
As well.
And you spoke of the alumni community as well, about your class itself. What's been your experience of working with the alumni community through your professional journey and some of the ways in which the community has helped you? And I'm sure you've done that as well. Give us some sort of insights into that.
When I was here, there was only 9 previous batches.
Sure.
Right? Now we're going into this big year where there'll be 25.
Yeah.
And you see now, I can pick almost any fund, any MNC, any segment of manufacturing in India, and you can find an alum. And it's actually, it's fabulous, right? I can actually navigate, network with people in ways that I couldn't, even 10 years ago. And so the strength of this network and the capabilities of it is extraordinary. And I think it allows me actually to navigate and operate in India in a way that I just couldn't have. You kind of go back to an earlier question around why I thought I needed to be in a place like this. Even when I go to a new city, when I land in Delhi or I'm in Mumbai or places I know, I'll often look at LinkedIn, I'll find alums, and people are very happy to connect, have coffee, see where things go, have a conversation. And so the strength of this alumni group is extraordinary and critical actually to my ability to function in India. Actually, I don't think I could be here and operate without it.
Lovely. Tom, for young professionals who want to enter this space of business and impact, especially in the emerging economies, what's the one mindset shift that you would recommend they should have for them to sort of succeed in this space?
I think they should be prepared for a long journey, right? To actually build business models in healthcare and agriculture and cold chain, they take years to actually germinate, right? The returns, the payoffs, and the mindset of, let's say, tech-based venture investing, which is, can I get 10x, 100x in 3 years, generally don't tend to play out in the same way in more physical models.
Sure.
Right? And so, the great generation of India Inc. businesses, right, were not necessarily built in the time horizons of venture capital. And so these are really long-haul business building mentality type models. I think actually the thing to India's benefit is that you do have many, many students that actually come from family business, that come from generational value creation. And I think those kinds of skills and that mentality applied to helping solve problems, whether again it's in agricultural productivity or education or health, is very, very relevant. Coupled with actually what we discussed is actually traveling, going out and seeing India, right? Seeing your own country. I think there's always a bias that, you take for granted what's in your own backyard.
I have so many questions that I can ask, but I do want to ask you, as an alum who's graduated from the school 15 years ago and been in India for a very long period of time, and someone whose knowledge of India and the nuances of this country is at a very, very high level compared to many fellow countrymen, including myself, I would say. What's in your view the school is doing well, and how do you look at ISB, in all these years? I know you've stayed engaged with the school, but there may be something at the back of your mind sometimes saying, hey, I wish ISB had done this slightly differently or invested more here or whatever. Do you have any such comments or any observations?
Yeah, well, I won't say that it needs more ABCGs like myself, but no, I think the school, known for producing very high quality, super smart people going into banking and consulting, right? But I think there's also a lot of people who have taken the path of social entrepreneurship, of social sector work. In fact, you've had some of them on the program. A couple of my classmates and people from other batches I know well, who are actually out, telling those stories in India and working in places that might not be obvious for business school graduates, right? But so I think actually encouraging some of those stories, right, or those career paths, because there's so much, that can be done across India in the social sector space, right? And it's not obvious in a business school, but actually the skills are incredibly applicable. Right? You're still solving a business challenge, more or less, right? It just might be for a different segment. And in fact, perhaps even more pronounced, where good business model innovation and thought and things you can bring from the classroom can be applied. When I was a student here, the campus in Mohali didn't yet exist. Right? And so I think the school's breadth and depth of being able to have this one school, two campus approach is incredibly unique, right? And I don't know a lot of other institutions that are able to do that. And I think that gives, a different perspective, right? And obviously allows for a larger intake, more alums doing more interesting things. And so, the school has grown in ways that I think have been extraordinary. And again, back, the alumni network is really important to me, and really critical to my continuing to be in India. And as long as I am in India, which I think will more or less be forever, right? It's a part of me. It's something that I will always lean on and always have, and very much part of my story here.
So coming to stories, with your kind of rich experience, and rich is probably an understatement for someone who's come from the US, knows so many things about India, has traveled the length and breadth of the country, is there a book that's in the making? Is there a series, something? This is something that needs to be chronicled beyond something like this for a much wider audience.
There could be. I've actually started to recently write on Substack, and I called it IST, India Spotlight Time. And I'll tell you why.
India Spotlight Time.
Spotlight Time, as opposed to standard time. But I'll tell you why I chose that title. It's actually informed very much by a certain cognitive bias that I learned here on campus.
Okay.
There's something called the street lamp fallacy. And the story goes, there's a guy who's crawling around on his hands and knees looking for his keys. And someone comes along and says, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm looking for my keys. And they say, well, why are you looking for them here? And he says, well, because the light is better, right? And, we tend to look at things that are illuminated, that are legible, that are understandable, right? And so my interest with the series is actually looking at India. What are the stories that are not being told, right? We talked about these flattened narratives of India, right? Yeah. Incredible dynamism, right? If you open the newspaper, it's mostly about large companies. It's about startups, right? It might be about public policy, but very little about, what's it like for the other 63 million MSMEs in this country that are functioning, right? Extraordinary complexity. And so I tend to write about that. And so I'm really actually taking 20 years of bottled up anecdotes, stories, and trying to put them into a format. And maybe it's a book. I also have, desires to document on film some of the train travels and actually visiting some of these clusters that I go to.
Especially around trade and commerce?
Especially around trade.
It's wonderful. And I do wish, I wish that you actually get to doing this in a more structured way so that more people benefit from reading about their own country through the lens of an ABCG as you...
There's an ABCG, yeah.
It's now time for our rapid fire section, Tom. So this is, questions, quick answers, no right or wrong answers. So what's the one insight about India that most outsiders fail to understand?
That you have many Indias here. It is not one monolithic country.
Yeah.
Right?
What's the one ISB memory that stays with you?
Oh, geez, I've got a lot. There's this picture that floats around of me from the ISB talent show.
Okay.
Of me dressed up as Ravana, screaming, expressing my displeasure with Ram for having taken Sita back. And so, I
have to look at that picture.
Yeah, I used to actually get, often put into costume for various student shoots and projects people were working on. So a lot of fun with that.
One Indian habit that you continue to have with you, carry with you?
Well, I'm always on IST. My watch is an HMT.
Okay.
From
very few people would probably have an HMT at this point of time.
From Bangalore.
Yeah.
And idli sambar every morning.
What does building Bharat mean to you?
So it's really about enabling trade, but enabling those businesses that we talk about outside of the spotlight.
Yeah.
Right. And in this whole India versus Bharat debate.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of institutional money, a lot of venture capital focused on building businesses largely for the upper echelons of urban India. Right. A little harder to raise that kind of capital, deploy that kind of capital beyond. And so that's, to me, trying to build in the solutions in those businesses that tend to get ignored by large institutional capital pools.
Got it. One thing about India that you've grown to deeply appreciate over time?
I think the sense of community and this feeling, this idea, and I'll use a term that I learned in India, which is just landing up, right? There's this kind of more the merrier feeling, right? Where people are welcome, right? Anyone can come along. You're welcome to, certainly a wedding, a festival, someone's home.
Yeah.
And these feel very different, actually, back in the West. That sense of warmth and I think camaraderie is not the same, right? There can be more of a distance and a coldness. And so when you've come to live it and appreciate it, going back to something else actually, feels a little jarring.
And what does ISB mean for you in a sentence?
It's foundational for me. It is where I think really actually came into myself. I think I discovered a lot about myself. And I think in my case, my India story cannot be decoupled from ISB. I mean, it's true to say the reason I came here from outside the country was very much to work on something that ISB was housing, right? And continue to carry that forward. And because I don't come to India necessarily with family here, right, or roots, the school and the alumni community and the networks I formed here are my roots. It is very anchoring for me.
Lovely, Tom. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with us. I could go on. This is one of those conversations which really even HMT would sort of not let us stop. But this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guru.